Thank you for tuning into our final day. I know this is the day you have been waiting for because our main feedback point was how everyone loved Rolland Warren. So I'm sure that you guys have been waiting for this day. It is finally here. I'm so excited that you guys get to hear what he has to say about how the church relates to what we do here at Piedmont Women's Center. So Kelly, why don't you tell us a little bit more about Rolland before we tune in?
Yeah, so some of you may have never heard of Rolland Warren. He is the president and CEO of CareNet, which is one of our national affiliates, which we operate with at Piedmont Women's Center. So Rolland is a Princeton grad. He played football at Princeton. He met his wife at Princeton, and he has a great personal story that he's actually going to share with you today as part of his talk. So I don't want to steal his thunder there. But not only did he go to Princeton, he actually graduated from the Wharton School of Business. So Rolland Warren, thank you for being with us at Night for Life, and we really hope you guys enjoy.
Hello, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Great introduction. It's great to be here. Never been to Greenville. Well, actually, I was here once when my son was on UNC's football team and they got stomped by Clemson. I think I was here then. And it was hotter than two biscuits. I remember that. So I don't have fond memories of this place, but that'll change tonight. that'll all change tonight, right? But anyway, it's a blessing and a pleasure to be here with you and to celebrate such a great event. I travel all over the country and speak to pregnancy center banquets and folks, and it's just amazing, particularly the years of steadfast work and hearing Kelly talk about what's been happening here and just watching the video. It's just amazing. And thank you for your faithful support for this work. I've been with CareNet. It'll be 10 years. I guess the next October, so I'm about 9 years in. And it's interesting, when I first started with CareNet, some folks kind of said to me that it seems like a strange career move. I had been working with National Fatherhood Initiative for about 12 years, an organization focused on helping men be better dads. And I moved to CareNet, and if you ever come to one of CareNet's conferences, there's a lot of women. And they even reflag the men's room sometime, so it can be hard to find one. And for a guy over 50, that's a challenge. But, it's interesting because it really wasn't a big career change for me. It was sort of a non sequitur, if you will, or a diversion in any way, because when I was a 20-year-old college student, my girlfriend, now my wife, Yvette, and I faced an unplanned pregnancy. And I'm still trying to figure out how that happened, but it's probably a different conversation. But I remember her going to student services to get the pregnancy test. She told me that the nurse came out after the results were in and said, well, it's positive, and without missing a beat, said, now, of course, you're going to have an abortion, aren't you? And Yvette said, well, I don't want to have an abortion. The nurse said, well, what year are you? She said, well, I'm a sophomore. Nurse says, gosh, well, it seems like it's the right thing to have an abortion. Of course, you're going to have an abortion. Yvette says, no, I want to keep my baby. I want to get married. Nurse says, that sounds like it makes a whole lot of sense for you to do that. How are you going to graduate from Princeton with a baby? And what do you want to be when you graduate? Yvette says, well, I want to become a doctor. And she says, oh my gosh, become a doctor, graduate from Princeton without a baby, doesn't seem like a wise choice. How are you going to pull that off? And Yvette persisted, and we learned that although the student health plan at the time would pay for the abortion, it would not pay for the delivery of the baby. And we were pretty much penniless college students on our own. So I remember her coming back to the dorm and us sitting on the edge of the bed, which is obviously where we should have spent all of our time. I just like to keep it real. I mean, it's funny now, but it wasn't that funny then, I'm telling you. And her telling me this story, I mean, she was a bit shell-shocked. The nurse was an older woman, probably a mother herself. She could have said, okay, let's see how we can make your choice work. Let's see how we can help you. She could have asked, who's the father? Where's the father? Maybe we can have him come to the next visit to support his child in your choice. She didn't say any of that. Some choice. So there we were. And it's interesting because I basically told her in my 20-year-old way at the time, I said, we're going to move forward with the plan. We're going to move forward with the plan. We're going to get married, and I'm going to be a husband to you and a father to our child growing inside of you. And that's exactly what we did. It's our picture from our wedding day. Yeah. I don't know where I'm looking, actually. This is the only wedding photo we have, by the way. We got married by the Justice of the Peace, a couple of students there with us. That's it, and I don't know where I'm looking. Some of you might have 20-year-olds, and sometimes they just... And, we've been married for 39 years now. Our 40th wedding anniversary is next year. Yay for our team. Yeah. And, that nurse was right about one thing. Yvette didn't graduate from Princeton with one baby. She actually graduated with two. So our two sons, Jamin and Justin. Yeah. 2 kids, 2 boys. Pretty amazing. Yeah? Good stuff. And, she actually carried Justin, our youngest, in the graduation ceremony, and this picture got taken by an AP photographer and went all around the country. This young lady graduated from Princeton with a baby, and it was news, and we were not trying to make news. Justin had to eat. Yvette had what could feed him, so we strapped him on. That's what that was about. Here she is graduating from medical school. Been a doctor for over 25 years. It's my wife. Here she is delivering her first baby. Not hers, someone else's, but yeah, she's an amazing woman. Amazing woman. And here are my 2 sons, Jamin and Justin, both married. Circle of life, circle of life, circle of life. And it's interesting because, Jamin is our oldest now. He and his wife are pregnant. And so we've got a granddaughter on the way. And, every time I look at that picture, I'm just reminded of the old saying that anybody can count the number of apple seeds in an apple, but only God knows the number of apples in a single seed. See, that's why it's so problematic when we try to make these decisions, try to control life in the way that we try to control life and determine who should live and who should not based on the situation that we see, because we often see dimly, don't we? I once did an interview early on when I came to CareNet, and someone asked me, said, what were you thinking, when you said to your girlfriend in that moment that you'd be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her? And I hadn't really been asked that question before, hadn't thought about that before, and the word that came to mind for me was this word, certainty. Certainty. That's Jamin's ultrasound picture there. Shiny nickel for you if you can find him in that, but certainty. See, because I was certain about what was happening inside of her, what was growing inside of her, that it was a life, that it was my child. Because I was certain about that, I was certain about everything else I needed to do. And I remember some years ago, early when I started with CareNet, there was this web-based Planned Parenthood ad, and it basically made this point that this abortion issue, it's complicated. It's just complicated. We can't talk in terms of pro-life or pro-choice. It's just so complicated. It's complicated. It's really complicated. And I started to think about a pregnancy test. Now, some of you may have taken a pregnancy test. I did. It was part of the interview process at CareNet. It was negative, just so you know, but just to fit in with the peeps, you got to fit in. And my understanding is with the pregnancy test, there's a cup that has some stuff in it, and there's a stick, right? You got a cup with some stuff, and then you got the stick, and then you take the stick, you put it in the cup with the stuff, and you pull it out, and you read it, and it says it's complicated. You don't get those kind of tests down here, huh? It's not really all that complicated, is it? Either the child gets life or the child does not. It's not really all that complicated. Certainty. Well, as I started to think about all the stuff that I'd kind of gone through around this unplanned pregnancy with my wife, as I was making this journey to this ministry, God brought something back to my mind and brought something to my mind. Actually, it was kind of fresh and a new thing I hadn't really thought about because, I was so focused on, unplanned pregnancy and the one that I faced, and it actually was not the best known unplanned pregnancy that I was aware of. You know which one was? The birth of Christ. You see, from Mary's perspective, this pregnancy was unplanned. She had hopes and dreams and aspirations for her life that did not include a child at this time and in this way. And she had all this uncertainty swirling around. What was Joseph going to say? What was her mother going to say? Her father going to say? The community going to say? How was she going to take care of this child? What was going to happen to me? All this uncertainty swirling around, and she, in the midst of all that uncertainty, what did she do? She focused not on the uncertainty of what she didn't know, she focused on the certainty of what she did know. There was a life growing inside of her, and it wasn't a life worth sacrificing. It was a life worth sacrificing for. And she said, what? Let it be unto me, as you have said. And when I started to think about the life issue in that context, I realized that Kelly and her team and anyone who's doing this work and all you who would support it, really what you're trying to do is encourage women to ascribe to themselves the virtue and the character of Mary. Despite all the uncertainty of what you don't know, focus on the certainty of what you do know. There's a life growing inside of you, and it's not a life worth sacrificing, it's a life worth sacrificing for. And it's so pernicious what the other side tries to do, because essentially what they try to get you to do is not focus on the certainty of what you do know, but focus on the uncertainty of what you don't know and make your decision based on that. What kind of decisions do you think you'd make if you say, look, here's what we know and here's what we don't know? And let's make our decisions not based on what we know, but based on what we don't know. Certainty. Well, it's interesting because when you think about that story of Mary and Joseph, you also kind of get this other perspective, which is, what did God do to make sure that Mary's unplanned pregnancy wasn't a crisis pregnancy? Well, he sent an angel to Joseph. See, we'll call it an angel, not a smurf or a gnome or something like that, but an actual angel went to Joseph too. And Joseph was a man, and he was a man with a plan, because if you're a man without a plan, you ain't no kind of man. And he had a good plan. He thought it was a good plan. He was going to put her away quietly. He was going to divorce her quietly. That was the plan. It was a better plan, the alternative plan, which is like she could have been stoned or whatever. But this was a good plan. The angel comes to him and says, listen, I know you're a man with a plan, but I got a new plan for you, man, and it is this. I want you to be a husband to her and a father to the child growing inside of her. And what does Joseph do? He says, what? Let it be unto me as you have said, essentially, and chooses to do that. And then, of course, when Herod wanted to kill Jesus and Mary was at risk, who did the angel go to again? Joseph. Gave him a new plan to provide and to protect. You see, there's always been a role for men in God's design when it comes to an unplanned pregnancy. The birth of Christ shows us that. It actually shows us that there's a role for men in this, in God's design. And why is that? Well, it has to do with the fact that the Holy Family is Holy Family. God has a design. Why? Because God doesn't just want children to have life, he wants them to have abundant life. But you have to ask yourself, what does abundant life look like to a baby? Some of you may remember that abortion doctor, Kermit Gosnell, is in prison now, thank God, but he delivered babies and then he would take the life. It was an abundant life consistent with God's design. Or the doctor can deliver the baby and hand it to a single mom. Now, we know being a single mother is a courageous, life-affirming act. But is that really God's design? Is that really what God wants for mothers and for children? See, I grew up in a single mother home. I know how difficult that is for mothers and for children. Or that doctor can hand that baby to a father and mother who love each other, who love their child, and ideally who are united in a godly marriage. Now that's the fullness of abundant life. And how do we know that? Well, because that's what happened with Jesus. Do you ever think about that? I mean, Scripture could have been written in such a way that Jesus just came into the world. He just showed up, or that he came into the world via a single mother. I mean, you think that God was kind of like, look, okay, I can do this immaculate conception thing, but those dudes with the stones, Mary, you're kind of on your own there. That's way beyond my power. Come on. No, there was a principle here that the birth of Christ illustrated. See, what happened here is that the birth of Christ accomplished God's purpose without violating a principle, this high idea, this design. See, Mary and Joseph were in a covenant relationship. They weren't living together or kicking it or whatever the kids say these days. They weren't engaged. They were betrothed. That's a covenant relationship, a marriage that was not consummated. And Jesus comes into that construct that accomplishes God's purpose without violating his design, this high idea. And when he came into the world that way, well, he certainly was given that sort of abundant life in his humanity, and then became abundant life for us all. And this notion of abundant life is one that really animates the work that we do at CareNet and the work that happens at the pregnancy centers across the country, because it's based on John 10:10, where Christ said, I came that you might have life and then have that life abundantly. Now, when you unpack that verse, it's a pretty amazing verse, because Jesus is talking about something very special. See, when he's talking with the word abundantly, when he uses that word abundantly, and you look at it in the Greek, it's the word perissos. Perissos. And that means superabundant in terms of quantity and superior in terms of quality. Now, superabundant in terms of quantity, you think about, I go to McDonald's or someplace or wherever you go, and you say, they say, do you want us to supersize you or whatever, and they give you a new cup. This is not what he's talking about. He's talking about the cup that you have, you just stick it up against the fountain and it just overflows. And then superior in terms of quality, when you think about quality relationships, like if you're married, right? Like the highest quality relationship is supposed to be with your spouse. Is there intimacy there? And Adam and Eve had a relationship where they walked with God in the cool of the day. There's no better relationship than that, because you realize that Adam and Eve are the only humans that have ever been able to be in God's presence and not die. Why? Because they had the absence of sin and the presence of righteousness until they sinned. So what Jesus is actually saying there is that I came that we might take you all the way back to the garden. Do you get that? All the way back to the garden. That you might have perissos, the fullness of life. And when he's talking about life here, he's actually talking about two types of life. He's talking about bios, which is where we get the word biology, and we talk about if someone has life, you check, well, do they have a heartbeat, right? Do they have life? It's their heartbeat. We talk about that. But he's also talking about zoe, which is a unique type of spiritual life that only comes from a relationship with God. And so what he's basically saying is, I came that you might link your bios to my zoe. In other words, that you might be a heartbeat that's heaven-bound. And so that led me to a perspective. Because, see, Jesus is saying that he's not pro-life. Jesus is saying he's pro-abundant life. And I started to think, well, if Jesus is pro-abundant life, and I should link my why statement to his why statement, then I can't be pro-life, I must be pro-abundant life too. And if he wants abundant life for those outside the womb, that means he wants abundant life for those inside the womb, because life begins at conception. And so if I leave you with anything today, and you remember anything today, it's this notion of thinking about kind of moving how you think about the life issue, from being pro-life to being pro-abundance life, and anchoring how you think about this issue firmly in John 10, which is Jesus' why statement. See, because you can be an atheist and be pro-life, because you're solving for a heartbeat. But you can't be an atheist and be pro-abundant life, because you're solving for a heartbeat that's heaven-bound. You follow me? Okay, so let's talk about that a bit more. And because here's the thing, so you can't be pro-abundant life without engaging fathers. I mean, about that piece. I'm going to unpack that a bit more for you. And you can't be pro-abundant life without talking about marriage. And I always tell folks, so they don't get it twisted, it's not just about whether that woman marries that guy who got her pregnant. I know that that's not always possible or going to happen, even though we know that across every psychological, social, educational, and economic measurement of child well-being, kids do better when they're raised by their two biological married parents. That's the data. But the woman who's coming to Piedmont, is coming because she's delinked motherhood, fatherhood, sex, and marriage, and God's design for those things. And she's walked in the fullness of that. The guy's walked in the fullness of that, and now she's facing an unplanned pregnancy, which is a consequence of that. Therefore, if we love her up and she delinks all that stuff and it stays delinked, what do you think happens too often? She'll be back. Or she'll be at an abortion clinic. See, our sign cannot say, thank you, come again. That works for Chick-fil-A. Because, see, our sign has to say, thank you, don't come again. Not to be served, but to be service to others. See, because Jesus said, come as you are, but don't stay as you came. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. This is not a retail consumer business. This is a relationship building, covenant building ministry, because that's what Jesus did. He didn't do retail. And so if we don't rebuild those institutions in her mindset, in his mindset, then we have repeat business. That's great if you're Planned Parenthood, because that's what they want, because they're a retail business too. They're not a ministry. So one of the main things when you start thinking about things from a pro-abundant life perspective is that you've got to be focused on these covenant-building institutions that take you out of a transactional mindset in terms of how you think about the issue. Now, this may be the first time some of you have heard this before. I get that often when I speak. And there's a reason for that, and a lot of it has to do with how we approach the issue, like when the issue came into the public square, in terms of how we thought about this, and the fact that, the pro-choice side brought it into the public square and said, look, this is about a woman and then a question mark, and then they started defining the question mark. It's about the product of conception, it's about choice, it's complicated. And then we said, well, no, it's about the baby. We have to save the baby. We have to save the baby. And then the other side started attacking us. They said, well, you don't care about women. You just care about saving babies. Anybody ever heard that? And so our response was, oh, no, we care about women too. Love them both. Love them both. Love them both. Now, for most people, many people, too many people in my view, that's where the pro-life movement sits. One side saying it's about a woman and a question mark, and the other side saying it's about the woman and the baby. And I submit to you that we need to think about this differently. I had a reporter once ask me, said, is CareNet more for the woman or more for the baby? And I said, it's a great question. It's like asking me, am I more for breathing in or for breathing out? I mean, they're both life. They're both essential to life. And I said, I just reject your entire paradigm. I reject your entire framework, because the way that you frame the issue is a way that is not really consistent with how you should be thinking about this issue, particularly when you consider a biblical narrative. You see, there are two reasons that we should reject abortion, not just one. Not just because it's an assault on the sanctity of life, but also because it's an assault on the sanctity of marriage and family as God designed. See, there were two things happened when Roe v. Wade was decided, and we only talked about one thing and focused on one thing. And the thing that we focused on actually was the thing that's happened before. The thing we didn't focus on was the thing that actually had never happened before, which was what we did was the law delinks fatherhood and motherhood in the womb. So now legally, men become fathers at birth, and women become mothers at conception. Now, if you wonder why it's hard to get a guy connected when he's not married to the mother, well, we've been telling him for 45 years plus that you actually aren't a father. That's huge. That had not happened before. And I don't even have time to kind of walk through the implications of that. But it's significant. It's significant. You see, because our God is a God of unity, and he united fatherhood and motherhood together in the womb, and the baby is a living reflection of this unity. And what God has joined together, no society should put asunder. And moreover, fatherhood is a more fragile cultural and social institution than motherhood, and we've stripped it from its God-given connection in the womb, and the effects have been profound. If you're walking down the street and there's a young lady who's pregnant, and there's a guy holding her hand, and you point to her womb and say, hey, is that your baby? Who else's baby is it going to be? I mean, I know we can do some crazy stuff now, but 99.9%, of course it's my baby. Now, the guy holding her hand, as you say, is that your baby? And that's not a dumb question. See, society helps connect fathers that way. And marriage was an institution that helped connect fathers to the womb. It's the best societal glue to do that. So what the law did, it de-linked that connection. And the effects have been profound. The effects have been profound. And so when Roe v. Wade was decided, I mean, what we should have declared loudly and continue to declare, and I say so we should be declaring now, is that we reject Roe v. Wade not just because it's an assault on the sanctity of life, but also because it's an assault on the sanctity of marriage and family as God designed. In other words, we believe that children should have mothers and fathers from the point of conception on as God designed. Now, if we had said that in 1973, you could have heard a pin drop in the culture. Say it today. Say it in some churches today. So we ceded ground on the marriage issue. Just don't talk about that in the context of abortion, even though what you see in God's design, exactly what he did when there was an unplanned pregnancy, he what? First thing the angel told Joseph was, do not be afraid to take her as your what? Wife. In other words, the first thing that the angel did was affirm the sanctity of marriage and family before he even told him who Jesus was. Is that what we do? I'm just saying. And the other issue is that if we don't frame it right from that perspective, then what ends up happening is that we end up making the issue all about the woman, which is basically what the other side says. And essentially what we end up doing is arguing about whether the baby is a question mark or not. Because the framework that they laid out that we put our pegs into has no on-ramp for the father or husbands. That's why we don't talk about it. And that's why for decades we've done very little to connect men to this issue. We did a national survey and we asked women who you were more likely to discuss your abortion decision with. And we gave them a long list, their girlfriend, their best friend, their mama, their dad, Planned Parenthood. I mean, long list, the father of the baby, everything. Guess who was number one? Father of the child. Number one. Wasn't even close. The next was a medical professional, but it wasn't even close. I mean, literally, it was not even close. Then we asked them, who was the most influential in your decision to abort? Same list, guess who they said? Father of the child. Now, I'm a business person by training. So if I wanted to do business with somebody, they say, listen, Ronald, look, I am the decision maker. My business is my choice. But you see Joe over there in the corner? Every major business decision, I talk to Joe. What do you think I'd be trying to do? Get to Joe. Is that what we've been doing? We're talking to everybody but Joe. Did the same survey, which we're going to release in a few months, with men. Men who had been participating in abortion asked the same question. Who did she talk to? Guess who was far and away number one? Me. She talked to me. Then we asked the men, who was the most influential in her decision to abort? And guess what they said? I was. So the women are saying he's the most influential, and the men are saying he's the most influential. But we largely built a movement that doesn't even engage him. That works for the other side because they don't need him. But if she has the baby, don't we want the guy to pay for that? And certainly from a societal and Christian perspective, we know children need more than that. And don't we know that father-absent homes have young women and young men who are more likely to be sexually active, which puts them more likely to be at risk for what? Abortion. This chart talks about the support needed by mothers and children, right? Physical, emotional, spiritual, and social support. God is wise. He has a design to make sure that mothers and children get the support that they need. It's called husbands and fathers. See that teal in the corner? That's the amazing work that happens at Piedmont and 1,200 other affiliates that CareNet has across the country. Amazing work. Over 70,000 little ones were saved over the last year as a result of the amazing work that's happening here all across the country. Needs to be supported. Needs to be supported. But we got a problem. See that blue area? That's called missing support. See, physical, emotional, spiritual, and social support from conception to birth, right, which is where pregnancy centers are. But if you walk into a pregnancy center with a 10-year-old, unless they wear diapers, there's not much we can do for you. So the woman is making the decision about whether to abort her child based on the support she has after birth. This is about 9 months and 1 second. So if she can't see that she has that support, she's much more likely to have an abortion. 86% of the women that have abortions are unmarried. Did you know that? 86%. So how are you going to solve the abortion issue without rebuilding a marriage culture? Do you see? And how are you going to build a marriage culture without engaging men? Do you see? Missing support. So there's a change that we need in order to get to where we need to get to. And in my view, the pregnancy centers are part of that, but it's the church. Now, I'm in the South, and I understand when there's one person, it's y'all, and when it's more than one, it's all y'all. Is that correct? Did I conjugate that properly? Did I get that correct? I just want to make sure. Got my lexicon, dictionary, all y'all. So that would be all y'all, right? If you're part of a church, all y'all. It's a change that needs to be made. Same survey, but from a different organization, Guttmacher, which is pretty much a kind of a research arm of Planned Parenthood. A question was asked about religious affiliation of someone who had abortion, of women who had abortion. 54% said they were either Catholic or Protestant. 54%. And then we did our survey, same one where we heard about men, and we found that nearly 4 out of 10 women were attending church at least monthly at the time of their first abortion. If you look at the data like, Gallup or Barna or whoever, who are the, quote, real Christians, not the CEOs, Christmas and Easter only people. It's attending church at least monthly, and most of them more than that. These are real Christians in the church on Sunday and the abortion clinic on Monday. Now, let's just use some rough numbers. Abortions, roughly about 850,000. Based on the data, it's gone down some, but frankly, there's some big states like California that don't report. So let's just use 1 million for a rough number, just for easy math. So use my 40% number. 40% of 1 million is $400,000. The average abortion is roughly $500, particularly for earlier abortions. If they're later term, it's more expensive. But 500 times 400,000 is 200 million. 200 million that Christians are spending on abortion. Now, we're marching here, marching there. We should. Defund Planned Parenthood. We should. But what if we defund Planned Parenthood ourselves? What if Christians just stop having abortions? We're such frequent customers, they actually have a script for us. Did you know that? They have a script. See, we need to overturn Roe v. Wade in our own churches and in our own pews. You see, this is the log in our eye versus the speck in the culture's eye. And I'm not discouraged by that. In a sense, I'm excited about that because we know where we are. Now, lest you think I'm being too critical of Christian women that have abortions and Christian men that support it. There's a question I have to ask you. If a young lady takes a pregnancy test on Sunday morning and she goes to your church, and that test is positive and it's not good news, who exactly is she supposed to talk to in your church? Does she know? See, she has to know when she gets that positive test that the church is not going to try to treat her the way that Jesus treated the way that the Pharisees tried to treat the woman caught in adultery. See, you can't stone the woman without stoning the baby. See, she has to know that her church is going to treat her the way that Jesus did. He said, neither do I condemn you, right? But go and sin no more. In other words, sister, come as you are, but don't stay as you came. Be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Which means there has to be a ministry on-ramp in the church so that Planned Parenthood never looks like a compassionate alternative to us. Because they actually market against us. When they say care no matter what, they mean care no matter what your church says. So we have to have a ministry on-ramp to be able to do that. And you know, this issue, it's an issue that's anchored in the church. I mean, the response needs to be anchored in the church. James 1:27 says that religion that God our Father finds as pure and faultless is what? To care for the orphans and widows in their distress. Well, I started to think about that, and when that was written, what was an orphan? Well, it was a child without a father, and what was a widow? It was a mother without a husband. The difference was, back then, the husband and the father was dead. Today, too often, the proverbial husband and father is saying to that mother and child, you're dead to me. So what happens at Piedmont is what you have there is cultural orphans and widows. We call them single mothers and children. And the church, anyone who's interested in religion as pure and faultless in God's sight, that should be all y'all and all y'all, has a very specific call to that demographic. So I want to submit to you that, see, this is not Kelly and her team's work and you're helping. This is your work and she's helping. And her ministry team is helping. See, this is a para-church ministry. Para means to come alongside the church. So if you're an attorney and you have a paralegal, who owns the client relationship? The paralegal? Nope, the lawyer. The paralegal has a very unique set of skills for a very specific transaction, for a very specific time. But ultimately, the relationship belongs to you. So I want to submit to you that you should be thinking that the clients at this pregnancy center are members of your church that just don't know it yet. Are you thinking about it that way? Any of y'all been to a wedding? Anybody? Willing to claim their spouse? Anybody? There she's back there. She's like, yeah, I love that man. You ever been to a wedding and everybody's there, groom's there, like pastor's there, maid honor, groom's there, everybody's there. And sister's hitting the keyboard and the bride's not coming out. She looks over at pastor and he hits it. Bride is not coming out. You ever been to a wedding where the pastor turns to the maid of honor and said, you need to step in so we can keep this thing moving? You ever been to one of those weddings? You'd be like Jacob all jacked up, marrying the wrong person. Well, what do? Well, you go check on the bride. She may have left her shoes in the car. She may have ripped her dress. You check on the bride. Why? Because there ain't no wedding without a bride. Ain't no wedding without the bride. The church is the bride of Christ. That would be y'all and all y'all. See, the pregnancy center, pro-life movement, blah, 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 is not the institution that Christ established for transforming the world. It's the church. So if we're not having the impact on this issue the way that we should, you don't know why that is? We can't replace the bride. And I've seen many movements try to replace the bride. Can't replace the bride. We support the bride. But we can't replace the bride. I love Dr. Tony Evans. He said, said an interesting thing that just inspired me so much. He said, that sometimes when the church does not respond or fails to sort of act consistent with God's prescribed agenda, he chooses sometimes to postpone his active involvement until his people are prepared to respond. I go all across the country, people are praying for the end of abortion, waiting on God. And I think sometimes God's waiting on us. He's waiting on us. I love to tell folks that life decisions need life support. And this amazing pregnancy center, it's like that speedboat, right? Somebody's in the water and they're drowning, they're having issues, and it gets out to them. It can get places that other boats can't, and it got buoys, it throws them out, gets them on the boat, love them up, dry them off, and there's another one, get them on the boat, love them up, dry them off. But if you got a small boat, what happens over time? You got too many people on the boat. You look around and say, who can swim? Put somebody back in the water. I call it the 18-18 rule. We see her in 18 months with a new guy in a new pregnancy, or we see her daughter in 18 years, or someone her son got pregnant in 18 years. See, because that small boat needs to be connected to the big boat. And the big boat, that's y'all and all y'all. That's the church. See, because the small boat has a very limited number of buoys. But you see those life rings? Those rings, those are the reasons why women have abortions and why men support it. And folk in the church have the support that's needed by folks in the pregnancy centers. So if you're thinking only one way, that we come with baby bottles with change and diapers and support, don't get me wrong, we need that. We desperately need that. But you got to be thinking another way. Because what's supposed to happen is the small boat pulls up next to the big boat, and people off the small boat get on the big boat. It's thinking about this issue from a different perspective. We created this resource called Making Life Disciples. And it's designed essentially to kind of help small groups in churches come alongside folks in pregnancy centers to give them life support. Any of y'all in that small group? Anybody in a small group? Right? Most of the time our small group's about us loving us. It's true. Somebody new try to come to your small group, like, You better start we call that a small group plant. Like, this is our thing. You're going to mess up our feng shui. We got a thing going on here. What if our small groups became about us loving them? What if your small group got trained on how to come alongside someone facing a pregnancy decision, so that when Kelly and her team have someone between conception and birth who's struggling with this decision, and particularly if they don't have a guy who say, I'll be a husband to you and a father to our child growing beside, and is looking for that life support, your small group says, we are going to come alongside you. And by the way, not just till conception, but we're going to come alongside you. She wants to have an abortion because she has no place to live. She makes this decision, her mom's putting her out. Guy next to her room. Guy's running because he's never had a father. He's terrified of it. Been a father for years. Will you mentor him? They've been living together for a while. They know where their relationship's going. You've been married for how many years? Will you mentor them? He needs a job. You got a business? Can you help? She can't get to her prenatal visit. She retired. Will you drive? Life decisions need life support. There's a lot of talk about Roe v. Wade being overturned. Lots. Are we prepared to win? Are we prepared for that? If it's overturned, all those women who are having abortions, what's the strategy? Just for them to become single moms? And all the cycle that we know there? Is that really the strategy? That's pro-life, but it's not pro-abundant life. That when she gets connected to someone who's in church, who's following Jesus and mentoring her and helping her to transform her mind So she starts to see sex in a different context. And maybe she's been to more baby showers than wedding showers. She don't even know what that looks like. Shouldn't the church be modeling that? What I'm talking about is thinking about this issue in the context of the Great Commission. You know, often when I ask Christians, are they pro-life? And they say yes. And then I say, well, you know, if you say, well, you ask the Christians, are you pro-life? Yeah. And you say, well, okay, well, how should I know that? Well, and they tell you who they voted for. You know it's true. Now, don't get me wrong. Abortion has a political component to it and needs a political response. It's an unjust, evil law. But it's not primarily a political issue, and here's the reason why. Every good work that Christians do should lead to discipleship. If helping someone who's facing a pregnancy decision is a good work, would you submit that it's a good work? That this is good work that's happening here? Well, then it should be an on-ramp to discipleship. Water for the thirsty, food for the hungry, clothes for the naked, compassion for the pregnant. So when you see someone who's facing a pregnancy decision, I would submit to you, your first thought shouldn't be, well, what kind of marital support, this, that, and the other. Don't get me wrong, you should think that way. Because 1 John 3:17 says, look, hey, if your brother and sister is in need and you have no pity, then the love of God is not in you. But your first thought should be, well, is she a disciple of Jesus Christ? She needs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. The child growing inside of her needs to be a disciple of Jesus Christ. The guy who got her pregnant needs to become a disciple of Jesus Christ. And when you start to think about it as a discipleship issue, you realize it's not something that comes around every 4 years or every banquet. You realize, no, we are called to go and make disciples. In other words, you anchor your pro-life perspective in the gospel of Jesus Christ, in the Great Commission. That's what it means to be pro-abundant life. You're anchoring your perspective in the Great Commission. And if it's anchored in the Great Commission, if it's anchored in discipleship, well, where's the seat of discipleship? The church. You see, pregnancy centers can do evangelism, which leads to conversion, but we're not called to make converts. We're called to make disciples. The church is the seat of discipleship. So the best that we can do is preach. We can share the gospel. There's an evangelism, and yes, I will be a convert. But if we send that convert back to the culture that makes disciples of its own, which is how she came to us in the first place, and how he came to us in the first place. Why? Because they were disciples of the culture. Because discipleship is not just a biblical construct; it's a principle of replication. So if you're a parent, your children are your disciples. If you're a gang leader, like this guy here in the front, he's been throwing me signs all night, but. Then your gang members are your disciples. It's a principle of replication. She came from a discipleship relationship with the culture. We love her up. She's a convert, but we send her back. The culture, discipleship, they're going to require her to adopt their worldview, which delinks fatherhood, mother, and sex and marriage. And then we see her again. That's retail. So what's supposed to happen is that she's supposed to move from the pregnancy center to the church for ongoing support and discipleship. Is that how you're thinking about it? Now, there's a little booklet that they gave you, Why We Can't End Abortion Without Discipleship. I encourage you to read that and embrace it, because that's what needs to happen here, is that we need to be thinking about the life issue as a discipleship issue, and in small groups in the church, coming alongside people facing pregnancy decisions. Do you realize if we do that, the gates of hell cannot prevail? Because we are the army of God. Gates don't move. Armies do. Let me close up here. Jesus had two types of ministries, okay? One of the ministries he had was what I call a retrieving ministry. The other was a receiving ministry, right? So when he called his disciples, remember that? We called the disciples, you with the net. Yeah, you. No, you with the net. Drop it. We're going to make you a fisher of men. You up the tree. Yeah, you come down. We're going to do a power lunch. Remember that? He's retrieving. But he also had a receiving ministry. Remember the woman with the issue of blood? Remember that? He didn't retreat, he just received her. And I love that story of the woman with the issue of blood because, see, abortion is an issue of blood. It's her flesh and blood. It's her flesh and blood. It's his flesh and blood. Abortion's bloody. It's an issue of blood. And when a woman is at risk for abortion or has had one, all she may feel that she can do is just touch the tassels of the ministry of the church. That's all she can do. And the dust and the dung and the dirt. Just touch the tassels. And do you have the sensitivity in your church like Jesus? To all the programs that are going on, who touched me? To physically, emotionally, spiritually, and socially restore this woman. He just received her. Now, you see the receiving and the retrieving coming together. When Jesus is on the water, Peter's on the boat. Remember that story? Right? And Jesus is out there, and Peter's like, hey, dude, I want to come out there. And Jesus is like, come on out. The water's fine. Peter steps off the boat, takes a few steps, takes his eyes off Jesus, the circumstances of life. Boom. Now, initially, what did Jesus do? He just what? Received him. Now, did he say when Peter was starting to sink, look, no, he shifted his ministry model from what? Receiving to retrieving. And he went and grabbed him, steadied him up, and they went back to the safety of the boat. When Kelly and her team have a young lady in the pregnancy center, and she says, I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to have this baby. I'm going to do it. And she steps off of the safety of the pregnancy center. And Kelly says, the churches are friendly. They're friendly folk. And we're out there going, we're friendly people. If you can make it here, we're friendly. And she gets home, and her mother says, you ain't living here with that baby. Now that guy says, look, you can be with this or you can be with that, but you can't be with this and that. And this is where it's at. She starts to sink. Now, if we ain't the only ones with a boat. Planned Parenthood has a boat. Planned Parenthood has a boat too. So my question, are you pro-abundant life? Are you thinking about this issue in terms of God's design for family, which was modeled for us in the first chapter of the first book of the New Testament? Because when a woman has a guy who says, I'll be a husband to you and a father to the child growing inside of you, and that life is transformed, guess what? She's more likely to give the child what? Bios, life. Are you pro-abundant life? Do you link that to God's call to discipleship? Are you thinking about it as a discipleship issue, that you should be a disciple maker, and that the woman facing an unplanned pregnancy is a mission field? That we should be retrieving and receiving the ones in the church and retrieving the ones outside of the church. Because when that happens, then guess what? Zoe. So I leave you. Are you pro-abundant life? Are you pro-abundant life? Amen? Thank you very much.
So Roland left us with the challenge. Are you pro-abundant life? What does it mean to be pro-abundant life? When I think about what it means to support a cause you believe in, it means that you're all in. And at Piedmont Women's Center, we really have 3 challenges. That's that you pray to end abortion, that you serve the most vulnerable, and that you give so others live. And there's all kinds of great information on our website about how you can come along and partner with us. But we can't be shy about asking you to do that, because it's actually the lives of tiny humans that are at stake. Think about that. The only difference between a baby in the womb and a baby once it's born is time. They just need time. And they need people who are there on the front lines advocating for them every moment. Kayla, tell us more.
Yeah, so that's a great why of why you should give. But how? How do you give? So this is going to be real practical. There is a link in the description of this video. Please click on that link and it'll take you to our website, which will give you several giving options. So there will be an option to give a one-time gift. If you are just really challenged about what we're doing and that's all you know that you can do right now, please just give a one-time gift on that website. The other option would be to become a monthly donor. We are at a point where it's great if we can plan out our monthly expenses. Just like you have a budget at home, we have a budget at Piedmont Women's Center, and we have monthly expenses. And so if you can commit to being a monthly donor, that would greatly benefit us as we move forward in our pro-life work. So if you are able to do that, just pray about it, talk to your spouse, and try to figure out what you are able to give to what we're doing here at Piedmont Women's Center every day. So whether that's a one-time gift or a monthly gift, we would love to see you as one of our main partners. So please click on the link and we will see you later.